Okay, so some final thoughts. So this is not a subject of formulas and memorization and definitions or pages filled with learning objectives. There are those definitions that I mentioned earlier that you do need to understand. Cultural assumptions, stylistic devices, cohesive devices. You do need to understand those, so when you read your marking criteria, you can be confident that you know how to achieve them. But you don't need to memorize different definitions like you need to in other subjects in order to then spit it out on the page in exam conditions word for word. So anything can be right and therefore receive a really good mark if you have enough evidence and argument. So think about all the different persuasive writing things you've got, the essays that you've got. There's not necessarily any right or wrong answer. Maybe you like cats better than dogs. Maybe you think that Lady Macbeth isn't evil because in the end she did feel guilty. So you can argue different ways, usually. I mean, sometimes it'll be really hard to argue in a certain way, but usually it's a two-sided thing. You just need to make sure you have enough evidence and argument to back it up. And if you're stuck with which way to argue, then go with what you genuinely believe. So that is usually most helpful in persuasive writing when you need to think about ways to support an idea. Don't go with something that you don't genuinely believe yourself, because that's going to make it so much harder to be authentic and passionate and think about all of the evidence that you can use to support it. So this may sound obvious, but you don't need to enjoy English to be good at it, but it does help. So a way that you can harness this is think about the real world applicability of things. It can be hard in English when we are given tasks like analyzing a really old text or comparing an old text to a newer version or things like that. But try and think about how these skills that you're learning are actually valuable in the real world. So analytical skills are so important in lots of different professions that you could go into. Definitely, for example, in what I'm doing with communication and journalism, you've got so much analysis that you have to do to think about the meanings of things, to think about the different interpretations that people could have of different ways of saying things. So there is real world applicability of the stuff that we learn in English. Also, just the general writing skills, grammar, and the ability to read and write well. They are the most fundamental things for any kind of career that you could go into. So we want to think about how it's relevant to us in the real world and the value that you can actually take from it. Use the resources around you. So there are built-in resources designed to guide you. And you're reading, this means reading your task sheets and marking guides and using the unique perspectives around you to help make your life easier. So think about your personal experiences when you're trying to come up with different creative writing ideas. Think about things that you've heard, things that you've seen, how you can mash things together and make them your own. Try and think about your own perspective. Back things up with reasoning as much as you can. Your teachers as well are a really important resource. They're there to help you. So something that I think some students don't take enough advantage of is the drafting process and just the feedback process. So what I mean by this is that you have a drafting process for assignments, and so give yourself time to improve. Give yourself time to practice writing things in the different genres you need to write in, and then mark things yourself. Get your teacher, if possible, to mark things, and then get feedback from them, or just get feedback from your own assessment of your work, and then understand how you can improve, what your strengths are as well, so you can maintain those strengths and work on your areas for improvement. And if you're getting feedback from your teacher, then you may not always understand that. So if you're going through a drafting process, make sure that you ask questions about the feedback. So there's no room for misinterpretation. So you're fully addressing everything that your teacher has said. The way that I approached drafting at school was that I treated the draft due date as the real due date, because when you hand in something that really reflects your true ability, you've put your whole effort into it, it would be the equivalent of what you would hand in if you weren't given the option of having a drafting process. If you hand something like that in, then the feedback that your teacher gives you is directly on your ability. So they are assessing what you've done, what you're capable of, and showing you exactly what you need to do to improve. If you just hand in a few sentences of something without much thought, or perhaps don't hand in anything, or hand in something that's just not to the standard that you're capable of, you're not getting the full picture of feedback on what you're really capable of. So you would then get feedback based on things that you knew you would have needed to do because you didn't put much effort into the first attempt. So always put lots of effort into your first attempt so you can get the full benefit of feedback, and ask questions if you don't understand any feedback. And also, so that's in the drafting process. But when you get feedback after you've received your final grade, don't be afraid to ask for feedback, for explanation about your feedback then too. I know it's easy to think, oh, it's over, I won't ever have to do that again, that kind of thing. But there's a few things to think about that sort of debunk that idea. One of them is that your English assignments and exams have common criteria. So your ability to use and analyze cultural assumptions, your ability to have grammar and cohesive devices, analyzing and using places and times and things like that. All of that criteria is actually the same across the different pieces of assessment. So just because you've finished one piece doesn't mean that the skills from that piece aren't relevant again down the track for a different assignment altogether. So if your teacher has said that you didn't incorporate enough cultural assumptions in your creative writing piece, then that is a really good thing to know and to understand. So for the next piece that you have, which could be an essay, you can address that and make sure that you know how to how much you need to be speaking about cultural assumptions, how to actually go about doing that, what they are, all of those sorts of things. So your feedback, your questions should not end after you've handed in the assignment. Always ask questions even after that to make sure you understand how to improve. Okay, some important skills in senior English to wrap us up. If there's ever a skill to learn to nail, it is analysis. So start with the sweet potato method and move to literary devices and structural features. So remember to hold the broader concepts in view and the author's purpose, the genre, and the character involved. Everything can be analyzed. You're thinking about, it can be easy to analyze just from our own perspective when we disagree with things that used to be normal back in times past, where other older texts were set. But really think about the context, the culture, and what makes sense and what doesn't in terms of that. And since everything can be analyzed to some degree, it means that you've got less need for memorization, because everything that you've got can be picked apart. So when you get into, for example, an exam, you should be able to use lots of different evidence to support your points. So to get started, write by hand on a piece of paper or just on your device and mind map out every thought you might have and then refine it as much as you can. And then to get really good, practice. Spend some of your allotted English time analyzing key quotes, thinking about how you can use different techniques to plan things and make your work flow. So you should start off with making sure that you fully understand a text that you've been given, if there is one, and fully understanding how to do the writing style that you need to do. So if it's essay writing and a Shakespeare text like Macbeth, you need to understand the text and you need to understand how to write a good essay. And you can do that in just on your device, for example. And once you've done that, you then would go to the next stage of mirroring the exam conditions that you would be in to actually do that essay. So once you're confident with those background things, you can then do practice essays in the time period with that sort of time pressure to reflect that exact situation you would be in on the exam day. And that will help you feel a lot more confident. And it will also allow you to think ahead about timing. So the X number of minutes through the exam, I should be up to this point in my writing. Those are the sorts of things that you can do when you've done practicing. Reading and annotating. So nothing says I am the smartest person in the room than actually reading a text all the way through. And then then you can supplement that with research. So some students just go straight to researching a little bit to read some summaries or read a blurb or try and understand it by just doing some research. But reading the text should always come first, then doing some research, and then preferably reading the text again. Markers can tell the difference between an essay written with lots of knowledge and one without. So annotate as you go, use any sort of resources that you feel most comfortable with, highlighters, sticky notes, everything. And constantly build on your thinking, your vocab, all of those things by reading outside of what's assigned to you as well. It can be anything that you like, and for short periods of time, but just getting exposure to different types of writing is going to help you build those things and make you a better writer. One of the best things that you can do for yourself in senior school is setting yourself goals throughout the year. And they can be really small. So try and answer some questions in class, try and achieve a certain grade, try and get the confidence to ask your teacher some questions. And by setting and achieving the goals, you can put yourself in that positive mental space. It can be sort of a bit of a reward system. You achieve something and you can reward yourself once you've achieved that. And then reflecting as well. Be sure to use both what you did well and where you lacked to guide the future study. So this is what I was saying before. Once you hand in your assignment, it shouldn't be over yet because you should have that period of reflection and asking questions about the feedback that you get so you can improve later on. Writing like a real person. So sometimes it's easy to slip into that habit of using complex, winding sentences to sound smarter, but it can have the opposite effect, sounding quite confusing and just odd if you take it too far. So you can have a look at these examples here and see how the first one is really quite confusing, and the second one is not only easier to understand, but it's also shorter. So writing more concisely is also clearer as well. So in writing his 1945 novella, Animal Farm, George Orwell efficaciously constructed an allegorical fable which shrewdly celebrates the Soviet Union's ascension to power. It sounds very fancy, but it's just hard to understand. And markers are not going to want to spend lots of time reading and rereading what you've written to try and get meaning from it. So an alternative to this one is George Orwell's 1945 novella, Animal Farm, is an effective fable which allegorically reflects on the rise of the Soviet Union. And read before you write. So when you're given a task sheet, and hopefully a marking guide as well, read through it carefully before attempting the task. Highlight all the key points on the sheet and make sure you know what it is your marker is looking for so you can do well. Something that helps a lot as well is writing instructions in your own words at the start of documents that you've been given. So thesis needs to be referenced throughout the whole piece, or story needs the clear connection. So not only can you write little instructions as like translations of what you've been told to do, but also if your teacher goes through the task sheet, which they often do when you've first been given a task, you can write down little tidbits that they might give you. They might give you little gems that you can write down to then use later on. Either things that just explain the task or little hints about how to approach the task. And then if things are unclear, ask your teacher. They are there to help you. And then, of course, if you do have a script or a text to read, make sure you read the whole thing and preferably read it more than once as well, to put you in the best possible position. Make sure you're writing flows. Make sure everything connects together. Planning well is the easiest way to make that happen. There's lots of different forms. We looked at flowcharts today with the macro flow, but you can do mind maps, dot point plans, all sorts of different things. And never skip the planning because it will show in your final work. It's really tricky to get started with something and then to realize later on that it's not going to work, and it essentially means that you're going to have to start again. So you can avoid that by planning to begin with.